The void of space erupted with energy as the wormhole tore open, swallowing the ESS Pioneer whole. Humanity's first manned mission to Proxima Centauri had been proceeding perfectly until the sensors detected the anomaly. Commander Y. Santos gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered violently, emergency klaxons blaring throughout the vessel. "Status report," she barked, watching as her bridge crew frantically worked their stations. "Unknown energy signature, Commander," Lieutenant Park replied, his voice tight with controlled panic. "It's not matching anything in our database. We're being pulled off course by—" His words cut short as the view screen filled with something impossible. A vessel that dwarfed their own emerged from the darkness. 15 kilometers of gleaming obsidian metal shaped like a barbed spear, pulsing with violet energy along grooves that resembled veins. Before Santos could issue orders, their communication system activated without authorization. "Biological anomalies detected," came a voice that sounded like grinding metal, translated through their systems. "Containment protocol initiated." The Pioneer's engines died instantly. Santos ordered defensive measures, but nothing responded. They drifted helplessly as smaller craft detached from the massive vessel, approaching with predatory precision. "All personnel, prepare for potential hostile boarding," Santos announced shipwide, drawing her sidearm. "This is not a drill." The aliens didn't bother with airlocks. They simply tore through the hull with bare hands, the vacuum of space seemingly having no effect on their massive armored bodies. The first security team that confronted them fired pulse rifles. The shots merely scorched the intruders' exoskeletons before they moved with impossible speed, crushing humans with casual brutality. Santos watched the security feed in horror as her crew was systematically decimated. The aliens moved through the Pioneer like a scalpel, their 3-meter frames navigating human corridors with unexpected grace. Within minutes, they reached the bridge. The sealed blast doors crumpled like paper as 3 aliens forced their way inside. Up close, Santos could see they resembled bipedal insects with iridescent exoskeletons and multiple compound eyes that glowed amber. Their mandibles clicked as they surveyed the terrified bridge crew. The largest one approached Santos, who stood her ground and fired her reinforced titanium sidearm point blank. The bullet flattened against the creature's chest and fell harmlessly to the floor. With frightening speed, the alien snatched the weapon from her hand and examined it curiously before crushing it between 2 fingers, the metal crumpling like foil. "Such fragile tools," it said through some form of translator. "For such fragile beings." The alien produced a handheld device that scanned Santos from head to toe. The results seemed to amuse it, mandibles clicking in what she realized was laughter. "Your species registers as physically inferior in every measurable way," it continued. "Minimal muscle density, brittle skeletal structure, limited sensory capacity, brief lifespans." It leaned closer, its breath smelling of ozone. A biological footnote waiting to be erased. Santos felt herself lifted effortlessly by the front of her uniform. "I am Supreme Commander Vrax of the Valaxian Dominion. Your planet has been evaluated and found suitable for conquest. You will serve as our messenger." The journey back to Earth was spent in isolated captivity. Santos pieced together fragments of information through overheard conversations and glimpses of their technology. The Valaxians had conquered 17 star systems, each time following the same protocol: identify, evaluate, subjugate, or exterminate. When they reached Earth orbit, the Valaxians broadcast their message globally, using Santos as a visual example of human frailty. Supreme Commander Vrax towered over her as he addressed humanity. "Your species has 1 Earth year to prepare for integration into the Dominion. Resistance is illogical given your biological limitations. Demonstrate your value or face extinction." As monitoring satellites deployed around the planet, neutralizing any spacecraft attempting to leave atmosphere, Santos was returned to Earth, a broken messenger delivering a hopeless ultimatum. But in her underground xenobiology lab at Lake Baikal, Dr. Elena Chen studied the broadcast with narrowed eyes. focusing on something everyone else missed. The Valaxians' physical perfection revealed a critical vulnerability, one that humanity, with all its weaknesses, was uniquely positioned to exploit. "Too perfect," she whispered, highlighting cellular structures in the enhanced images. "Too uniform." A plan began forming in her mind, one that would transform humanity's greatest weakness into the ultimate weapon. Dr. Elena Chen's request for an emergency summit was rejected 3 times by the newly formed Planetary Defense Council. "Appeasing the Valaxians is our only option," Chairman Lin told her. "Your theories are dangerous fantasy." So Chen bypassed protocol entirely. During a high-level briefing with military leaders from 17 nations, the screens displaying Valaxian scout ship movements suddenly switched to her face. "Forgive the interruption," she said calmly, "but in approximately 5 minutes, security will trace this broadcast and disconnect me. Before they do, you need to see this." The screen split to show magnified cellular samples taken from debris left behind on the Pioneer. The Valaxians appear invincible, but their biology tells a different story. Look at the genetic markers, identical across every sample, down to the mitochondrial level. General Williams of the North American Coalition leaned forward. "What exactly are we seeing, Doctor?" "Perfect genetic uniformity," Chen replied. "They're practically clones. No variation in their immune systems, no biological diversity. A species that hasn't faced a novel pathogen in millennia." Security personnel burst into her lab as Chairman Lin ordered the feed cut. But the seed was planted. 3 days later, Chen found Captain James Okonkwo waiting beside her car in the underground garage. "The Lagos outpost was hit yesterday," he said without preamble, the fresh scar across his face still angry and red. "Valaxian demonstration attack. 2,000 peacekeepers gone in minutes." His fist tightened. "General Williams says you have a potential weakness." Chen studied him. "It's theoretical. And developing it would cross lines we've never crossed as a species." "They're already extinct," Okonkwo replied. "They just don't know it yet." The trench facility, buried beneath the Mariana seafloor, became operational in record time. Scientists from previously rival nations worked alongside each other, while Okonkwo's security team maintained isolation protocols. But the ethical debates quickly turned vicious. "This is genocide," Dr. Takashi shouted during the 3rd week, throwing his tablet across the conference room. "We're talking about engineered extinction." Dr. Kimura, the lead virologist, responded without looking up from her microscope. "And what do you call what they're doing to the Mars colony?" The room fell silent. Everyone had seen the smuggled footage, human colonists forced to labor in the thin Martian atmosphere, while Valaxians observed their oxygen deprivation with clinical detachment. Test subjects were worked until collapse, then dissected to study human limitations. Okonkwo ended the debate by playing the last transmission from Mars. A teenage girl, her lungs audibly failing, spent her final message not saying goodbye to family but warning Earth. "They're testing us, calculating how many of us to keep alive as labor stock. The rest are scheduled for processing. Don't let them do this. Whatever it takes. Please." Security concerns mounted as the project advanced. 2 infiltration attempts by human appeasement factions were thwarted. Resources dwindled as surface governments publicly prepared for submission, while secretly funneling materials to the trench. Chen worked without sleep, her team testing and discarding dozens of pathogen varieties. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: ancient bacterial samples recovered from Siberian permafrost. The microbes had survived in suspended animation for millions of years, evolving in isolation from the rest of Earth's biosphere. These organisms operate on biological principles the Valaxians have never encountered, Chen explained to Okonkwo. Their chemical signatures won't register on Valaxian biofilters because they've never needed to defend against anything like them. A critical discovery came when they intercepted and decoded Valaxian communications to their homeworld. Earth wasn't their primary target. It was merely a testing ground before expanding into more densely populated regions of the galaxy. Humanity was nothing more than a practice run. "We have viable samples," Chen announced on day 128, her eyes bloodshot from continuous work. "But we need fresh Valaxian biological material to confirm effectiveness. Theoretical models aren't enough." Okonkwo studied the holographic display of the Mars facility. "Then we go to Mars. Small team. Experimental stealth tech. Suicide mission," Chen said. "Only if we fail," Okonkwo replied, the scar on his face seeming to darken. "And failure isn't an option anymore." As they prepared for the desperate mission, sensors detected increased Valaxian fleet movement. The aliens were growing impatient, their year-long deadline suddenly compressed. Humanity's window for action was closing fast. The ESS Nightingale wasn't designed for combat. A research vessel retrofitted with experimental stealth technology. Its dark carbon fiber hull absorbed rather than reflected both light and sensor suites. Dr. Chen watched from the trench facility's command center as it slipped away under cover of a North Pacific storm, invisible to the Valaxian satellites overhead. "Stealth system functioning within parameters," reported the technician beside her. "Valaxian orbital grid shows no reaction." Aboard the Nightingale, Captain Okonkwo ran final checks with his small team. Dr. Aisha Kamara, whose research on viral transmission vectors was crucial to their mission. Dr. Ryu Tanaka, a xenobiologist with Special Forces training, and Lieutenant Maya Diaz, pilot and electronics specialist. Each carried a suicide capsule. Capture was not an option. "The Rhea outpost sits on Mars' northern basin." Okonkwo briefed them as the ship accelerated toward the asteroid belt. "It houses approximately 200 Valaxians and 50 human subjects. Our target is their biolab in the eastern quadrant. We'll need tissue samples, blood samples, and if possible, access to their medical database." "And if we encounter test subjects?" Dr. Kamara asked, her voice steady but eyes troubled. "Mercy extractions only if they don't compromise the mission," Okonkwo replied. "Primary objective remains sample acquisition." The journey to Mars took 6 days using the gravitic slingshot method. As they approached the red planet's dark side, sensors detected unusual activity. "Multiple ships in orbit," Diaz reported. "Pattern indicates they're preparing for departure. Something's changed." Tanaka enhanced the orbital feed. "Those are troop carriers. Looks like the invasion timetable's been moved up." Their narrow insertion window suddenly became critical. The Nightingale skimmed the Martian atmosphere at a dangerously low altitude, thrusters at minimal output to reduce heat signature. 20 kilometers from the outpost, disaster struck. A perimeter alarm they hadn't detected triggered automated defense systems. Energy cannons tracked and fired on the ship with devastating accuracy. Diaz executed a series of evasive maneuvers that would have killed a lesser pilot, but couldn't prevent a direct hit to the propulsion system. "Controlled crash is our only option," she announced, hands dancing across the controls. "Brace for impact." The Nightingale carved a kilometer-long trench into the Martian soil, coming to rest behind a ridge 7 kilometers from the outpost. Emergency systems sealed hull breaches as the team assessed their situation. "Comms are down," Diaz reported. "Life support stable but propulsion is gone. We have no extraction method." Okonkwo accessed the tactical display. "Then we complete the mission and commandeer a Valaxian shuttle. Suit up." They traversed the Martian surface using natural formations for cover, watching Valaxian patrols sweep the area searching for crash survivors. Up close, the outpost revealed its true nature. Not a scientific installation, but a processing facility. Human subjects were being systematically evaluated, their biological materials harvested and cataloged. "They're creating a comprehensive database of human biology," Tanaka whispered as they observed through high-powered optics. "Testing vulnerabilities, potential uses as biological components." A patrol passed too close, forcing them to split up. Kamara and Tanaka circled toward the medical facility, while Okonkwo and Diaz created a diversion at the power distribution node. The explosion drew most of the security forces, enabling Kamara and Tanaka to breach the biolab. "I need 3 minutes," Kamara said, connecting her sampling equipment to the Valaxian storage units. "You have 2, Tanaka replied, securing the entrance. The samples were nearly collected when alarms blared throughout the facility. A security breach had been detected. Tanaka held off the first wave of Valaxian guards with stolen energy weapons, but was fatally wounded protecting Kamara's escape. As she fled with the precious samples, she heard his final act, detonating his suicide capsule to prevent capture and destroy evidence of their mission. Kamara rejoined Okonkwo and Diaz at the secondary rendezvous point, grief evident in her eyes, but the sample case clutched firmly to her chest. They fought their way to the shuttle bay. But Kamara was captured in the final push. Rather than risk the mission, she activated her suicide capsule while looking directly at her Valaxian captors, denying them any intelligence. Okonkwo and Diaz escaped with the samples aboard a commandeered shuttle, evading pursuit long enough to achieve high orbit and activate the emergency beacon that would guide recovery forces from the trench facility. As Earth grew larger in the viewport, Diaz finally spoke. Was it worth it? Tanaka and Kamara. Okonkwo stared at the sample case, their friend's sacrifice contained in its secure interior. Ask me when the Valaxians are extinct. Dr. Chen stood before the circular chamber that housed the pathogen synthesis lab, watching through reinforced glass as robotic arms manipulated microscopic components. The Valaxian biological samples had provided the final piece of the puzzle, revealing unique cellular receptors found nowhere in Earth biology. "It's ready," she announced as Captain Okonkwo entered, still bearing the wounds from the Mars mission. The delivery mechanism is unlike anything they'll expect. The pathogen carriers resemble dust motes, microscopic crystalline structures housing engineered viral payloads, programmed to activate only when in contact with Valaxian biology. Too small to trigger their filtration systems, too simple to register as technology. "How soon?" Okonkwo asked. "That's the problem," Chen replied. "We need to seed their environmental systems directly. Their mothership is the only option. It connects to their entire fleet through recycled air and water." A communication alert interrupted them. The Valaxian High Command had issued its final demand. Earth's formal surrender ceremony would take place aboard their mothership in 3 days. A delegation of human representatives was required to sign the subjugation documents. "They've given us the perfect opportunity," Okonkwo said, studying the transmission. "But they'll scan for weapons, explosives, technology. These aren't any of those things," Chen replied, lifting a vial of what appeared to be clear liquid. "To their scanners, this will register as water with trace minerals. The same composition as human tears." The delegation was assembled with excruciating care. Dr. Chen as scientific advisor, Captain Okonkwo as military attaché, Commander Santos as the symbolic first contact survivor, and Specialist Zoe Klein, former art forger whose steady hands had been retrained for microscopic delivery. The Geneva spaceport served as their departure point, global media broadcasting what appeared to be humanity's final moments of freedom. Beneath her formal attire, Klein carried dozens of specialized capsules programmed to rupture at specific locations throughout the Valaxian vessel. "If we're caught," Chen reminded them in their final private moment, "use the suicide capsules. The pain will be minimal." The Valaxian shuttle that collected them was piloted by biomechanical constructs, spliced creatures that were neither fully machine nor fully organic. The short journey to the mothership passed in tense silence. The mothership's docking bay stretched for kilometers, filled with craft of various designs. Many bore the insignia of other conquered species. They were escorted by Valaxian guards whose compound eyes constantly scanned for threats, mandibles clicking in what the humans now recognized as expressions of contempt. "The lesser species arrive," announced their guide, a Valaxian officer named Hex. "Supreme Commander Vrax awaits your submission in the Grand Hall. You will be scanned for weapons." The scanning process was invasive but focused entirely on detecting metals, energy signatures, and known explosive compounds. The crystalline carriers remained undetected, classified as harmless biological detritus. The mothership's interior revealed disturbing insights into Valaxian civilization. Corridors formed from what appeared to be living tissue pulsed with nutrient fluids. Display chambers showcased preserved specimens from conquered worlds, a grotesque museum of extinction. "Soon your kind will join our collection," Kex commented, gesturing to an empty chamber. "Though only your more interesting specimens, the rest will be processed for biological components." The Grand Hall loomed before them, a vast chamber where hundreds of Valaxian officials had gathered to witness Earth's submission. Supreme Commander Vrax sat upon an elevated platform, his massive form even more imposing than in their broadcasts. "The ceremony requires specific protocols," Kex explained. "First, a viewing of Valaxian might, then the reading of surrender terms. Finally, the signing and collection of biological identification markers." The viewing provided their opportunity. While Chen and Santos remained for the formal proceedings, Okonkwo and Klein were escorted on a predetermined route through significant sectors of the vessel, a deliberate humiliation meant to showcase Valaxian superiority. This separation was precisely what they had planned for. At each junction, Klein's steady hands deposited delivery capsules into ventilation systems, water reclamation units, and nutrient distribution channels. The microscopic carriers began their silent spread through the vessel's circulatory systems. Meanwhile, Chen engaged in diplomatic delays, asking detailed questions about the surrender terms, requesting clarifications that required consultation with Valaxian legal experts. Each minute gained allowed the pathogen carriers to disperse further. When the teams reconvened for the final signing ceremony, Klein made a subtle gesture. Mission complete. The carriers had been placed throughout all critical systems. As Chen raised the ceremonial pen to sign Earth's surrender, she met Vrax's compound eyes with quiet defiance. "Do you have final words before your species accepts its natural place?" Vrax asked, mandibles spread in what passed for a Valaxian smile. "Only this," Chen replied. "You should have studied our history more carefully. Humans don't just survive, we outblast our predators." They departed the mothership as they had arrived, under guard but alive, carrying no traceable weapons, having committed no detectable act of aggression. As their shuttle returned to Earth, the invisible weapon they deployed was already beginning its work, spreading silently through the mothership's systems and into the connected fleet beyond. The extinction had begun. 3 weeks of silence followed the surrender ceremony. Earth's governments maintained a facade of compliance, publicly dismantling defense systems while secretly reinforcing underground shelters. The Valaxian monitoring satellites remained in position, their sensors revealing nothing of the growing anxiety below. Dr. Chen barely slept, stationed at the trench facility's communications array. Every hour without Valaxian retribution suggested their infiltration remained undetected, but also raised the terrible possibility that the pathogen had failed. "Still nothing," Okonkwo reported, joining her during the midnight shift. "No communications, no fleet movements, no orbital adjustments. The incubation period should have." Chen began when the alert system suddenly activated. A Valaxian patrol ship on the dark side of the moon had drifted out of formation, its trajectory becoming erratic before communication abruptly ceased. Within hours, 2 monitoring satellites fell silent, their orbital paths degrading without correction. "It's starting," Chen whispered. The first intercepted transmission came 3 days later, a fragmented emergency signal from a Valaxian cruiser near Mars. The universal translation matrix struggled with the unusual syntax, but the message was clear. Crew members were experiencing physical anomalies. The response from Valaxian Command was immediate and harsh. Maintain quarantine protocols. Report all symptoms. Await further instructions. More ships went dark over the following week. The monitoring satellites above Earth began failing at an accelerating rate, some crashing into the atmosphere in fiery displays visible from the ground. The trench facility surveillance team captured critical intelligence by monitoring Valaxian frequencies, documenting the progression of symptoms across their fleet. The first stage manifests as reduced strength and coordination, Chen explained to the Emergency Council. Valaxian muscle fibers are deteriorating at the cellular level. How long until full effectiveness? Asked the Chinese representative. Impossible to predict precisely, Chen replied. But based on the increasing panic in their communications, faster than we anticipated. A breakthrough came when they intercepted a medical report sent from the mothership to the Valaxian homeworld. The encrypted data, once decoded, revealed images of afflicted Valaxians. Their once perfect exoskeletons showed fracture patterns, compound eyes clouded with fluid. Internal scans displayed the pathogen's devastating progress. Neural pathways compromised, organ systems failing. Most revealing was the Valaxian response. Supreme Commander Vrax, himself showing early symptoms, executed medical officers who suggested an outside contaminant. Rather than seek treatment, he ordered infected ships to self-destruct to prevent weakness contamination. The mothership began plasma-purging sections where symptoms appeared, killing thousands of their own in desperate attempts to contain the spread. Their militaristic hierarchy is accelerating the contagion, Okonkwo observed. They're destroying themselves more efficiently than we could have planned. The pathogen's effect on Valaxian technology proved an unexpected bonus. Their biological ships, living extensions of Valaxian physiology, began exhibiting similar symptoms. Navigation systems failed as neural interfaces degraded. Weapons platforms lost precision as targeting algorithms broke down. On the 23rd day, a lone Valaxian transmission breached the trench facility's secure channels. The sender identified himself as Science Officer Kex, their former guide from the surrender ceremony. "Your weapon is elegantly designed," the message stated. "Our physiology prevents cure development. I offer technological exchange for treatment protocol. Respond with terms." Chen drafted multiple responses, but ultimately sent none. Any communication risked revealing their method and potentially compromising the pathogen's continued spread. If some survive, they'll rebuild and return, Okonkwo argued. This ends only one way. The Council's debate became irrelevant when long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures entering the solar system. A vast Valaxian battle fleet had arrived, ships not present during the infection's initial spread. Vrax's final contingency, Chen realized, studying the readings. They're not here to negotiate. The fleet commander's system-wide broadcast confirmed her fears. Earth will not survive its treachery. The infection stops with your extinction. As planetary defense systems scrambled to activate, Chen watched the approaching armada with grim determination. "They still don't understand," she said quietly. "The infection is already aboard their ships. They've just brought reinforcements for us." The Valaxian battle fleet descended upon Earth like a metallic storm. 17 capital ships, each bristling with weapons platforms capable of reducing continents to ash. At their center flew the Dominance, a vessel twice the size of the mothership. The personal warcraft of Vrax Toth, offspring and heir of Supreme Commander Vrax. Cities worldwide enacted emergency protocols, civilians flooding into subterranean shelters as defense forces mobilized. The fleet's trajectory suggested their primary target, Geneva, site of the treacherous surrender ceremony. "All vessels have entered upper atmosphere," reported Lieutenant Diaz, monitoring from the hastily established war room beneath the Alps. "They're deploying atmospheric disruptors." Within minutes, skies darkened globally as Valaxian technology seeded clouds with nanites designed to modify Earth's atmosphere toward Valaxian preferences, increasing carbon dioxide while reducing oxygen. The message was clear. They intended not just to destroy humanity, but to terraform Earth itself. Defense grid activated, Okonkwo announced as surface-to-space weapons engaged worldwide. Most missiles were intercepted mid-flight, but a coordinated barrage from 6 continents overwhelmed the defenses of one capital ship. It listed atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches before stabilizing at a lower altitude. Their response time is delayed. Chen noted, studying tactical displays. Ship coordination appears compromised. The Valaxian counterattack came with brutal force but unusual imprecision. Energy weapons missed primary targets, instead vaporizing secondary structures. Bombardment patterns showed erratic spacing. What should have been surgical strikes became scattered destruction. The pathogens already affecting them, Okonkwo concluded, but they still have overwhelming firepower. The Dominance descended directly over Geneva, its shadow engulfing the city. A focused beam sliced through the underground bunkers, exposing emergency shelters to the surface. Rather than immediate extermination, Vrax Toth's amplified voice addressed the cowering population. Your biological treachery will fail. The transmission boomed. The worthy among us will survive to witness your extinction. The broadcast revealed Vrax Toth's appearance. Once gleaming exoskeleton, now marred by spreading lesions, compound eyes clouded and asymmetrical. Behind him, bridge crew moved with jerky, uncoordinated motions, some visibly struggling to operate controls. Chen's analysis confirmed what the visual evidence suggested. The pathogen was progressing faster in the battle fleet than projected. The stress of combat combined with extended high-gravity maneuvers accelerated symptom onset. Biological systems integrated into their ships were failing at critical junctures. This vulnerability became devastatingly apparent when 3 Valaxian cruisers, attempting a precision strike on military installations in the southern hemisphere, collided in low orbit. The resulting explosion scattered debris across 3 continents. On the Dominance's command deck, Vrax Toth executed 2 navigation officers whose trembling appendages had caused targeting miscalculations. The ship's biological components sensed the commander's neurological deterioration, triggering automated safeguards that further disrupted fleet coordination. Humanity's remaining defensive platforms concentrated fire on visibly damaged vessels, exploiting emerging weak points in their biological armor. 2 more capital ships succumbed, one crashing into the Atlantic, another breaking apart over the Siberian tundra. As the 7th hour of battle commenced, something unprecedented occurred aboard the Dominance. Science Officer Kex, who had secretly survived Vrax's purges by manipulating medical scans, initiated an emergency transmission to the trench facility. The pathogen accelerates beyond control, his message stated, visual feed showing the chaos aboard the command vessel. Neurological symptoms manifest as rage and paranoia in late stages. Vrax Toth prepares to deploy singularity weapons. I cannot override command protocols. Chen's blood ran cold. Singularity weapons, artificial black holes designed to tear apart planetary crusts, were theoretical technology considered too unstable for practical use. He's going to destroy Earth, even if it kills them all, she realized. The remaining Valaxian fleet formed a precise geometric pattern above the planet, positioning for the synchronized energy burst that would initiate the singularity cascade. Their movements, though increasingly erratic, showed the terrifying discipline that had conquered 17 star systems. In the skies above the Mariana Trench, the pattern suddenly faltered. The Dominance fired upon its own support vessels, Vrax Toth's deteriorating mind apparently interpreting their positioning as a threat. 3 capital ships returned fire, their commanders equally compromised by advancing symptoms. The civilization that had conquered through perfect coordination tore itself apart in Earth's atmosphere, raining debris across oceans and continents. The Dominance, though heavily damaged, maintained enough control to broadcast Vrax Toth's final transmission. If we die, his ravaged form declared, mandibles dripping with fluid from internal hemorrhaging, your world dies with us. The vessel's remaining energy diverted to its singularity drive, the catastrophic power surge visible from the ground as blinding light erupted from its core. Humanity collectively held its breath, awaiting extinction. Instead, the singularity collapsed inward, the failing biological components of the ship unable to maintain the delicate gravitational balance. The Dominance imploded, taking the remains of the Valaxian command structure with it. The collapse was complete. 5 years after the Battle of Earth, Dr. Elena Chen stood at the observation deck of the International Space Station, watching the cleanup operation in low orbit. Mechanical drones systematically disassembled the remains of Valaxian vessels, salvaging technology while neutralizing biological contaminants. Earth below bore scars of the conflict, coastal regions reshaped by impact craters, atmospheric anomalies from the attempted terraforming creating weather patterns meteorologists were still struggling to predict. Yet humanity had survived, adapting to the changed planet as they always had. "The Europa facility is ready for your inspection, Doctor," announced Captain Rivera, her security escort. "The transport leaves in 30 minutes. The journey to Jupiter's ice-covered moon took 3 days aboard the Tanaka, Earth's first faster-than-light vessel, built using reverse-engineered Valaxian technology." Chen spent the time reviewing data on the quarantine facility housing the most controversial outcome of the war: 417 surviving Valaxians, including Science Officer Kex. These survivors had been found in stasis pods aboard a research vessel at the edge of the solar system, placed there by Kex before the final battle. Each had been given an experimental vaccine he had developed, insufficient to cure the pathogen, but enough to slow its progression. The Europa facility came into view as they approached, a massive dome embedded in the icy surface, surrounded by security measures visible even from orbit. Inside waited the most difficult decision humanity had yet faced. "Absolutely not," General Williams stated emphatically during the briefing. "These creatures attempted genocide. Their continued existence poses an unacceptable risk. They're contained and weakened," countered Dr. Ibarra, head of Xenobiology. "The pathogen has irreversibly damaged their physiology. Most can barely stand under Earth gravity." Chen observed the debate silently, studying the medical scans. The surviving Valaxians were transformed. Their once imposing exoskeletons thinned and brittle, their muscular systems atrophied. The mighty conquerors reduced to fragile shadows of their former selves. Kex waited in the conference chamber, supported by an exoskeletal frame that compensated for his weakened limbs. His compound eyes, once shimmering with contempt, now displayed a quality Chen had never observed in his species: uncertainty. "Your pathogen was elegantly designed," he began without preamble. "It targeted precisely what made us strong. Our genetic uniformity, evolved for physical perfection, became our undoing. Why should you be allowed to live?" Chen asked directly. "Your kind would have shown no mercy." "That is precisely why you should," Kex replied. "We conquered through strength. You prevailed through adaptability. If your species eliminates us, you simply prove you are stronger predators. If you show mercy, you demonstrate you are something we never understood, a species that evolved beyond mere survival." Chen studied the alien carefully. "You've been monitoring our communications. Those are human philosophical concepts." "Yes," Kex acknowledged. "I have studied your literature extensively. Your species has a remarkable capacity to find strength in weaknesses. We never developed such adaptive thinking." The decision before the council was unprecedented: execute the remaining Valaxians, or help them build a new society, one without the capacity for galactic conquest. Economic advisors argued for execution, citing resource allocation. Military voices warned of future threats if any survived. It was Commander Santos, still bearing scars from first contact, who shifted the debate. "I watched them tear apart my crew," she said quietly. "I wanted them extinct. But if we execute helpless prisoners, we become what we defeated." She turned to Kex. "Your children will know what you were, and what we chose not to become." The final vote was narrow but decisive. The Valaxian survivors would be relocated to a habitable moon in the outer system, under perpetual monitoring but with resources to establish a non-militaristic society. Their technology would be studied and adapted to advance human expansion into the stars. As Chen prepared to leave Europa, Kex approached her one final time. "You were never weak," he said, mandibles clicking softly. "We were simply too strong to recognize different forms of strength." Chen watched from the shuttle window as the facility receded, Considering the irony, humanity had engineered near extinction of a species that threatened them, then chosen to prevent that extinction from becoming complete. The weaknesses the Valaxians had mocked, empathy, cooperation, moral complexity, had produced a victory more profound than mere survival. The pathogen samples remained secured in Earth's deepest vaults, a reminder and a contingency. Humanity would venture to the stars not as conquerors, but as explorers, carrying the lesson of the Valaxians. True strength lay in adaptation, not domination. 30 years after Earth's victory, the Galactic Cooperative Assembly convened for its inaugural session in the orbital habitat New Geneva. Representatives from 27 species filled the diamond-shaped chamber, each delegation seated according to their physiological needs rather than hierarchical status. Dr. Elena Chen, now 87 and supported by medical technology reverse-engineered from Valaxian designs, was wheeled to the central platform by her granddaughter Maya. The younger woman's subtle genetic modifications, legacy of humanity's deep study of Valaxian biology, granted her enhanced strength and longevity without sacrificing human adaptability. Distinguished delegates, Maya began, her voice carrying through the universal translation field. We gather today not as conquerors or subjects, but as survivors and partners. The assembly included species previously trapped under Valaxian dominion, now rebuilding their civilizations with human assistance. What began as humanitarian aid had evolved into genuine alliances, each culture contributing unique perspectives to interstellar challenges. Most striking was the Valaxian delegation, led by Kexfa, daughter of Science Officer Kex. Her people bore little resemblance to their terrifying ancestors. Smaller in stature, their exoskeletons less rigid, their compound eyes showing subtle variations that reflected the genetic diversity they had deliberately introduced into their population. The Valaxian Renaissance, as historians termed it, had transformed a warrior species into scholars and artists. Their once militaristic society now produced the galaxy's leading medical researchers, their intimate understanding of biological systems redirected toward healing rather than conquest. 3 decades ago, Maya continued, 2 species stood at extinction's edge. Today, we stand together as architects of a cooperative galaxy. Behind her, a monument was unveiled, a double helix sculpture representing the intertwined destinies of all present species. At its base lay a sealed container holding inert samples of the pathogen that had nearly erased the Valaxians, preserved as both warning and reminder. When Dr. Chen was invited to address the assembly, the chamber fell silent. Few present had ever heard the architect of the Valaxian defeat speak publicly about her role. We were called weak, she began, her voice fragile but clear. Our physical limitations were deemed evolutionary failures by a species that valued only strength, but they fundamentally misunderstood what had shaped humanity. She gestured toward the Valaxian delegation. Our ancestors weren't the strongest predators on Earth. We couldn't fly or breathe underwater. Our senses were limited, our bodies vulnerable. So we adapted in different ways. We learned to cooperate across differences, to innovate beyond biological constraints, to recognize that diverse perspectives solve problems that uniform thinking cannot. Kexva approached the platform, performing the traditional submission stance that had once symbolized Valaxian dominance, but had been repurposed as a gesture of mutual respect. My ancestors sought perfection through genetic uniformity, she acknowledged. We eliminated variation, scorned adaptation, valued conformity above innovation. We called it strength. You showed us it was stagnation. The ceremony concluded with the ratification of the Cooperative Charter, establishing principles of mutual aid, technological exchange, and cultural preservation. As delegates formalized the alliance, long-range sensors at the system's edge detected an anomalous signal, an approaching vessel of unknown configuration. The automated defense grid activated briefly before recognizing communication attempts. The translation matrix struggled with the entirely new language structure, eventually producing a simple message. We observe your gathering. We come to learn if cooperation extends to new discoveries. Rather than panic, the assembly responded with calm efficiency. Scientific teams analyzed the signal while diplomatic corps prepared first contact protocols. Defense capabilities remained ready but undemonstrated. The hard-won wisdom of previous encounters shaped every decision. Maya caught her grandmother's expression, not fear, but fascination. "Another test," Chen murmured. "But this time, we're not alone." As the mysterious vessel approached, humanity stood not as Earth's sole defenders, but as members of a diverse alliance. The transformation from isolated prey to galactic partners represented their greatest evolution, one born from the very adaptability their enemies had once dismissed as weakness. The future remained uncertain, filled with potential threats and discoveries beyond imagination. But humanity had learned from victory what they could never have learned from extinction. True strength lay not in domination, but in the ability to change, to connect, and to rise together. The species once dismissed as weak had not only survived, they had thrived by transforming enemies into allies, turning near extinction into the foundation for a new galaxy.